Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where yesterday Variety had a major scoop, and there's a major shakeup within the DCEU, not only involving the top executives there, John Berg and Jeff Johns, but also Batfleck himself, who, the trade reported, will be out after the Flashpoint movie. That will be his last DCEU film. Now, this is a big win for Variety. They're usually behind The Hollywood Reporter and Deadline when it comes to getting such scoops. But I don't know if anyone would have believed it, particularly the Ben Affleck part, if The Hollywood Reporter had been the one to deliver the news. Because they've said that Ben Affleck is going to leave the DCEU so many times now, it's like the boy who cried wolf. But now that Variety is reporting it, it seems that it is indeed the case, which is sad. As I said in my coverage of this news yesterday, it's deeply disappointing. If you'd like to hear my thoughts on the executive shakeup and Ben Affleck leaving, I've put a link down below in the video description to the video I made yesterday when this news first broke. But that means that the Matt Reeves Batman standalone film is without a star. So let the speculation begin as the era of Batfleck truly comes to an end. Who will be next? As we've discussed many times, Ben Affleck was by far and away the best Bruce Wayne they've ever had, but he never quite learned how to look good in the suit. So I think, while I really loved having him as Bruce Wayne, I think that's one of the reasons it's maybe a little bit easier to move on, right? And also, I just think at this point with the DCEU, everybody just wants to move on. And it's like, at this point, if you're in or you're out. And please, in a nice way, if you're out, there's no shame in that, but please just be out. I think this half in, half out situation is another one of the problems that plagues the DCEU. So anyway, Jake Gyllenhaal has been rumored for the role for weeks now. And then also a number of people have brought up Armie Hammer, who of course was George Miller's pick to play the Dark Knight in his Justice League movie that never was. And I even said in my Call Me By Your Name review, because Armie Hammer's having another moment right now, that I finally saw in Armie Hammer what George Miller saw in terms of his capability of playing Batman, and Bruce Wayne in particular. But I have to say, Armie Hammer isn't getting any awards recognition for his work in Call Me By Your Name, which I think is a shame. I think the two of the most overlooked performances of the year are Armie Hammer and Sebastian Stan in I, Tonya. It's criminal! But anyway, Armie Hammer, that just goes to show that he still really is persona non grata, or persona non care, right? With the media, with the industry, and with audiences. And I think Jake Gyllenhaal's a little bit of a similar problem. I mean, he has an awards contender stronger. You heard about it lately? No. I know last time I saw it, I was on iTunes, and I was like, oh yeah, and I didn't rent it. So while their names are bandied about, there's someone who's throwing his own hat in the ring, his own 1950s hat, because it's Mad Men star Jon Hamm. Apparently he really wants the role. That's the latest rumor, and he's going after it quite aggressively. Now this will either have a happy ending where he's like, see, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I thought I'd make a good Batman. I bothered Matt Reeves a whole bunch until he made me Batman, and it turned out great. Or he could end up pulling a Sean Young. If you don't know that bit of Hollywood history, Sean Young, most famous, I think, for her work in Blade Runner, and now being resurrected in Blade Runner 2049 by computers. But she really wanted to be Catwoman, to the point where she was going and making appearances on television shows, talk shows, dressed up as Catwoman. But she was kind of doing a Julie Newmar bit because they hadn't invented the cool Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman yet. And as you can obviously tell, Sean Young didn't get the role. And that actually made her persona non grata in Hollywood because it was considered massively uncool. Jon Hamm hasn't done anything publicly yet. But he's apparently campaigning for the gig quite hard with Matt Reeves. There's been some discussion that he's pals with Ben Affleck, but I'm sure, Ben Affleck's had a tumultuous run here, and I can't imagine if he's voluntarily leaving that he would begrudge anyone for trying to take the role next. In fact, he might be like, hey, careful what you wish for, right? Now, my concern is that Mad Men never succeeded ratings-wise. I mean, it got a lot of attention in the media. It was a media darling, a critic darling, but the show nobody ever watched Mad Men. It was a really interesting situation. So I worry about Jon Hamm's ability to bring anybody into the theater. Although I think he's in the exact same boat as Jake Gyllenhaal and Armie Hammer. I don't think any of them can sell tickets. And I also have to say that Jon Hamm is coming off of Baby Driver. I thought he was not particularly good in the film. I mean, it wasn't bad. But, that's a successful movie. A lot of people really like Baby Driver, so it certainly gives him some momentum. His last project makes him look pretty darn good. I'm a big Jon Hamm fan. I think he's very talented. I think he's quite funny. And as a friend of mine pointed out last night, Gal Gadot Gal Gadot knows him from Keeping Up with the Joneses, which they recently co-starred in, so she could certainly give him a nudge. He certainly got the chin for it, and I do think that he would also make a fabulous Bruce Wayne. But I don't know how he'd look in the suit either. Again, something Ben Affleck never was able to master. So I guess I'd call him in for a screen test, but I'd be awfully nervous that audiences have already rejected him. And I think, I don't know, I think he would make I don't know, I think he'd make as good a Batman as Ben Affleck would. And we all see how that turned out. It turned out great, but a lot of us liked it, but a lot of people rejected it. So I'm sure that Warner Brothers is just as trigger shy when it comes to casting this role as we are, right? So I'm curious, what do you think of Jon Hamm for the role? Who would you cast as the next Batman? I don't know, John Reeves and Jon Hamm together. But the Apes movies never really made a ton of money either, right? I mean, Matt Reeves is coming off of an Apes film that didn't do well, even though Andy Serkis was quite good in it. So, it just goes to show you that just because the film, although I had major problems with the second half of War for the Planet of the Apes, as I detailed in my review, but a number of people liked it. But we don't need another BVS situation here where a number of people champion a film that most people, people didn't become venomous against War for the Planet of the Apes, but a lot of people didn't like it. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, speaking of casting, the second story of the day is from a couple of days ago. I didn't get to cover it, apologies. So I wanted to talk about it today. And that's that Ryan Reynolds isn't just in the live-action Detective Pikachu movie, but he is Detective Pikachu. Everybody really didn't know what to do with that news. My reaction was that it must be a great script or a big check, or likely both. I mean, to me, that was my second reaction, to be honest. My first reaction was, ooh, that reminds me of the kind of movies that Ryan Reynolds used to make before he was Deadpool. And it seems to be the type of movie he still needs to make, because he's really struggling and, continues to struggle outside of the Deadpool movies. Like, for instance, The Hitman's Bodyguard. It was okay. It wasn't a flop, but, it was a little bit closer to, like, movies like R.I.P.D. than I'm sure Ryan Reynolds and his management team would like. Also, I have to say, he's a real asset to the Detective Pikachu movie, because I think he makes it seem maybe a little more adult, right? Even though he can't obviously bring adult humor into the film, but he has such a strong adult fan base thanks to Deadpool, maybe he makes Detective Pikachu seem a little bit cooler to the non-family market. So there's that aspect. And also, he is a social media demon. He has such a large following. He's very savvy. Look how he's a very good advertiser. Look at what a good job he does with Deadpool. So it would be, obviously, he is an asset to Detective Pikachu, not only in the role, but also someone to help promote the film. I wonder how much he can promote it, though, in terms of bringing in Deadpool, because Detective Pikachu is a Universal film through Legendary. We just talked about Legendary the other day with their new CEO. But it has nothing to do with Fox or Disney if that Fox-Disney deal goes through. He's co-starring. Justice Smith will be who you actually see on screen. You just saw him, speaking of seeing him on screen, you just saw Justice Smith in the new Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom trailer. And Smith's father is kidnapped, and he needs Detective Pikachu to help him find his father. So basically, it's like A Wrinkle in Time, right? The boys' version. And I have to say, this is not doing a lot for making it seem like boys have more fun sometimes than girls, right? This girl has an adventure in the world of science and relativity, and this boy teams up with Detective Pikachu and Ryan Reynolds. All right, you're like, who do you have, Storm Reed? I have Reese Witherspoon, Oprah, and Mindy Kaling. All right, but anyway, Ryan Reynolds will play Detective Pikachu through the magic of motion capture. Speaking of Andy Serkis. That's so funny. Andy Serkis, and then Ryan Reynolds stands next to him, and he's like, hey, I bet I'm more popular than you. And then he's like, Andy Serkis is like, sad but true. Now, some people, when this news was first broke, said, but Pikachu only says Pikachu, right? Well, Vin Diesel only says Groot as Groot, and I think if there's anyone who can, Groot always sounds the same to me, right? That's a very nice paycheck for Vin Diesel. But Ryan Reynolds, I think, can truly make the different Pikachus sound very different, depending on what Pikachu was actually trying to say. But it doesn't matter. I'm sure he'll say that. I'm sure he won't be able to resist putting a joke like that in the movie. But it turns out that Detective Pikachu does talk, so he'll have Ryan Reynolds' voice. I don't know if Ryan Reynolds can do voices, and I don't know if Legendary and Universal would want him to. And they're like, no, we want Detective Pikachu to sound like Ryan Reynolds, which sounds very weird. I think this is a fine idea. Take that money, Ryan Reynolds, because his career again isn't working out outside of the Deadpool movies, and we'll see how Deadpool. I didn't like the initial Deadpool advertising, but I think that it's really found its footing, and I'm very excited for that movie. And so I can't bemoan someone for collecting a huge paycheck, and who knows, maybe it'll be good. especially when other money isn't rolling in. All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is the Quentin Tarantino Star Trek movie is moving along very quickly. Paramount, though, to explain the situation, Paramount really needs some movies on their slate. They're really trying to restructure desperately over there and quickly. So that's giving Quentin Tarantino a serious green light. And it's not only moving along quickly, but it seems to be moving along pretty darn well. Now, the biggest headline is that it has been revealed that Quentin Tarantino's Star Trek movie will be rated R. He wouldn't direct it otherwise. That's fantastic. And if that succeeds, after Logan and Deadpool succeeded, you could probably expect to see a number of blockbuster films go into R-rated territory. I mean, remember, we talked about the box office numbers for the Star Trek reboot the other day. They're not that great. I mean, they're not horrible, but they're not that great. It's not like Disney's like, I'm not making an R-rated Marvel movie. I make billions of dollars with the PG-13 versions. But, Logan and Deadpool easily surpassed all of the Star Trek movies box office-wise, so why not head into the R-rated territory? And also, who wants to see a PG-13 Quentin Tarantino movie? That seems ridiculous. Now, it turns out the writer's room was just to kind of like solidify the idea and to pick one single writer to rule them all, to write for Tarantino. Although, don't get too nervous. I suspect that Tarantino maybe doesn't want to do the Star Trek research, so he'll let somebody write the skeleton, and then he'll come in and seriously rewrite it. But the three finalists are Drew Pearce, who worked on Iron Man 3, Sherlock Holmes 3, and Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. I'd like to point out, Sherlock Holmes 3, of course, never came out. But it didn't, right? Yeah, Iron Man 3, though, and Rogue Nation have very strong creative ownership by director-writers, Shane Black and Christopher McQuarrie. So I don't know what Drew Pearce contributed. Lindsay Beer, who is doing a lot of big movies that haven't opened yet. That's always very nerve-wracking, right? You're like, are they good? But she has some impressive resume. Godzilla vs. King Kong, The New Masters of the Universe, Barbarella, and Dungeons and Dragons. So that's good. But then the front runner, and I think this should be the front runner, is Mark L. Smith, who wrote Vacancy, but also The Revenant, which seems pretty Tarantino-y all on its own. So this is very exciting. And some people have been saying this is going to qualify as his last, Quentin Tarantino's last movie before he retires. I don't know if this counts as one of Tarantino's films because he's not technically writing it, right? This is a good loophole for him, I think. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. Now, the viewer question comes from Madison Cahill. Madison says, "Hey, Grace, I wanted to know what's the difference between getting a job in film or in television?" Great question. I think the big picture answer is the quality and type of life that you want to lead as a professional. All right, so it used to be scale was another reason. Either you're working on like these big elaborate productions or you're working like on a sound stage, on a television show or on a set, week to week, but because, network television was never as flashy as movies. But now that you have this these streaming shows that look like movies, that's changing. It's also changing the steady versus sporadic work angle, right? If television is a steady job, film is not. However, with a lot of these streaming shows, they don't know if they're going to make it past their first or even second season. So it's not quite as steady a gig as television usually is. I think once you get past season 3, you're good to go. But the other exception, though, to having steady movie work is if you're either a director who gets hired a lot, or you're a director. I'm assuming you mean behind the camera, by the way, Madison. Apologies if you meant in front of the camera. But for anyone behind the camera, if you can hook up with a director who works consistently, like Tim Burton always uses the same people, right? So you'll always work on Tim Burton's movies. Unless this box office doesn't go well, then he might decide to replace you because it sure as heck ain't him, right? It can't be him, or else he would not continue to work. The other thing, though, which I think is very important, is the tone of your career, right? One is like being in camp, that's film, where you work on a project for 3 months intensely. You go often to a faraway location, you shoot on location, you meet new people all the time, and then you go away, and sometimes you never see those people again. Whereas television, because they're shooting so many episodes, it goes on for sometimes seasons. It's like reporting to a job. You get like the weekends off. Usually when you're shooting a movie, you only get 1 day a week off, but that's because you don't work consistently. So you work really hard and then you take a really long break and you wonder if you're ever going to work again. But with television, it's like basically having more like a regular job, right? Because they're like, oh, we could get this extra shot, but we can just do it tomorrow because we're shooting a whole season. Whereas a movie's like, we have a very limited window to work here. It's also, I think, a little bit more of a stressful hostile environment. So anyway, I hope that explains the situation better to you, Madison. Thanks for the great question. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below, I think, today's top 3 stories, Madison's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered. Oh, well, actually, there won't be a morning movie news on Monday because the Golden Globe nominations are coming out. So anything you'd like to see covered on Tuesday, and any questions, of course, that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.